So I recently got done playing through The Legend of Zelda, and not just one game, I mean a lot of the games. I've played at least 6 back to back, I believe. My count goes from Link's Awakening, that's the one on the Nintendo Switch. I started with Link's Awakening, and then I went to A Link to the Past, and then I went to Skyward Sword, and then I went to Ocarina of Time, and then I went to Minish Cap, and then I beat Wind Waker. Yes, so Wind Waker is the newest game out of all of the Zelda games that I've beaten, and there's a good amount of things I want to talk about when it comes to the Zelda series. This is a completely non-scripted video, but I just wanted to get my thoughts out there because I figured that it would be kind of cool to talk about Zelda, even though I'm not exactly its target demographic. I want to get that off the bat. Now let me give you some background. I've never played a Legend of Zelda game before the summer of 2021 or 2021. I don't know why I said it that way. And the times I did play Zelda for the fun of it wasn't very long. I played Ocarina of Time maybe on the 3DS a couple of times, and I thought that it was okay, but I never really cared too much about it to get into it. So come summer, when my friend catched up to the storyline of Final Fantasy XIV, I made him a promise. I said I would start the Zelda series because I had never played it, because I wanted him to catch up to 14. So now I went through and played a couple of the Zelda games myself. And something I really want to talk about is just the general series as a whole and my experiences with it. Now this is completely random. Like I said, I'm not scripting this. This is all off the cuff. So if there's going to be a lot of weird audio things that I'm going to have to cut out for this video, and I'm probably going to keep this in anyways because I'm okay with that. So let's talk about it. Link, I think, let's start with the main protagonist of Link, who I have learned is not Zelda. Link is a very interesting character because he doesn't have a character. I know he's supposed to be the character that you're supposed to get into. You're supposed to be the person that Link is, because you can always name him in the different times that are in the different games, which is good. It's a personification of who Link is. But Link does have a specific personality. You can tell in some games he emotes and other games he doesn't, but more often than not, you can tell that Link has his own set personality. All you're really doing is just naming the hero after whoever you want to name him after. The times I'm thinking about where Link definitely has a personality is in Wind Waker, where he's the most expressive. He doesn't have voices, obviously. He doesn't ever talk in any of the games, but he does talk with his face in that game. He always expresses, he's always emotive, and I think that he's probably the best Link I've seen so far in the iterations of the game. I could be wrong, but Toon Link is probably my favorite in the sense that he's somebody who I really think is worth being a hero. He does a lot in his own game, and I think that he overcomes a lot in his own game. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'm going to talk about the different games and in their individuality as we go on. So let's start with Link's Awakening, the first game I played, because I don't have a structure. So I'm gonna go game by game. I think that's a lot better. In Link's Awakening, you play as Link, who seems to have crash landed on a beach or an island. There you go. He's on this island, and his goal is to wake the windfish so that he can get off the island. Why? I have no idea. But regardless, we gotta go do it, because Link is like, okay, I can't build myself a raft for some reason and escape the island. I have to go, do this. But I know that that's kind of what Zelda's all about, is doing these arbitrary tasks to get to one set goal. So Link's Awakening is the first game I played. It was the remake on the Nintendo Switch, and I thought it was pretty fantastic. I loved the open-ended nature of it, despite the fact that it is kind of linear if you think about it, in the way that it kind of holds your hand and where to go and stuff like that. But I think it's really good for somebody like me who's never played another Zelda game like that before. That was the first top-down Zelda game I've played, and it was fantastic. I loved every moment of it. The dungeons are really creative, and I spent a really long time on one of the dungeons where you push the blocks and stuff. I'll probably put the dungeon up on the screen so you know what I'm talking about, but the one where you have to push the block around, or the ball, and you got to get into a specific spot. I really like that dungeon. I think that's a pretty good dungeon. There was a dungeon with the colored blocks too. I actually don't even know if it's the same dungeon, but I want to say it's the same dungeon. I like that one a lot. Wow, I don't even remember most of the dungeons anymore, which is kind of sad. It has been quite a while, but I guess none of them were really that memorable if I can't think about them. I like this one part where you're going to the sand area, and you gotta go, and that's when you find out felt like, oh, maybe things aren't what they appear to be. And, you know, we all know that in Link's Awakening, it is a dream that he is in. And I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how interesting it is for a game to decide, hey, you know, the game itself is not even real. Except maybe it is, because the girl on the beach, Marin, I think her name is. I want to say it's Marin. Marin has a completely cool demeanor. She feels like she's very self-aware as to what's going on. And the fact that we see her as a bird at the end of the game is really cool. I like the storyline behind the game, even though it's not really like a super crazy storyline. I know this is the first Zelda game where you're not in Hyrule, so I think it's really unique, and how they decide to use all the space and stuff. There's a lot of Mario references. There's a lot of like weird, trippy stuff that you can do because it is a dream. And I think it's fantastic. I think it's a wonderful idea, to be honest. Obviously, the game has a lot of stuff in it. There's that really long fetch quest that I really didn't like, that you have to do in order to get a specific item so that you can go do the final boss, which is where the windfish is at. You have to wake him up using the different musical elements, musical items that you use. It's really cool. It's a really cool game. I think, to be honest, it was a really solid introduction to what Zelda is and what it could be. It has the traditional 7 or 8 dungeon layout that normal games would be, you know, will use, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I definitely wanted to get that out of the way. It was a solid introduction. I think it's fantastic. I actually probably would go back and play it again if I had the choice. Actually, I think I do have the choice, but I have to finish Twilight Princess and do all that other stuff before I can do that. But anyways, let's move on to the next game that I want to talk about, and that's A Link to the Past. A Link to the Past was the second game I played on the list, and that's because, canonically speaking, the game A Link's Awakening takes place after A Link to the Past. It's the same Link, I've heard. So I was like, you know what, fuck it, why not? We'll play that. So I played A Link to the Past, and that one, the only reason I would say is interesting. I don't like A Link to the Past all that much. I think it's a pretty good game. I think it's a foundational game is what it is. It has the foundation for what Zelda will become. The only reason I don't like A Link to the Past is I think that it's kind of long and drawn out, but we'll get to that as we go on with all of the Zelda games, and I'll like kind of give my thoughts on the overall series. But I definitely think that my biggest problem with A Link to the Past is that I wish there was a remake. It's not that it's unplayable. I just think that I didn't have as much fun as I thought I did. Now that I'm thinking back, I definitely enjoyed it at the time, but as I'm thinking about it, I don't know if I would want to go back to play it, because I think that it's just not as fun for me anymore. And that's just due to the fact that it's just a strange, you know, dichotomy of what I thought Link's Awakening was and A Link to the Past is. And I think my biggest problem is that both of the game, one of them is more open-ended than the other. A Link to the Past is very open, and so not a lot of you have to do a lot of exploration, which is fine because that's the core of the game. But I think A Link's Awakening is more solid, structurally solid. I think it is, like, that game is tight. I know it was supposed to be on a Game Boy, so that's why they made the limitations that they did, but I like the way the world flows in A Link's Awakening rather than A Link to the Past. I think A Link to the Past is a little strange. Now, the one difference of this game, A Link to the Past, is that you can go between the dark world and the normal world. And I thought that was pretty cool. I thought that you can use that creatively, and they did. You have to, in some moments, you have to be in the dark world to get over an obstacle that you couldn't in the normal world. And then you transport yourself to the normal world, and then you go and do the dungeon that you need to do. What I do like about this game compared to A Link's Awakening is that you can tell on the map where the dungeons are, so all you have to do is get there. And I think that's pretty good. I think that's a pretty smart way to handle it. I think if nothing else, my favorite part is the map system, due to the fact that it's just so easy to be able to go ahead and find where you need to go. But as far as I'm concerned, A Link to the Past is just okay. Like I said, I don't think I'll ever go back. It does one thing, and it does one thing really well, and that's to establish the mainstay of the Zelda series and the formula to which the other games would adhere to. And I'll talk about that more as I finish covering up the synopsis of the other games. So jumping to the complete opposite end of the spectrum of the games that I wanted to play, I played Skyward Sword next. A lot of the games that I've played are on the Switch, because at the time I had my Switch, so I wanted to play all of the games that I could on the Switch first, because it was nice to lie down and play those games. So Skyward Sword was next, and I think it's genuinely not bad. I actually really like the combat. I love the way it works on the Nintendo Switch. I know that in the original Skyward Sword it was kind of annoying, but that's not my experience, so I cannot talk about that. What I can say is that Skyward Sword is probably the most ambitious of the games that I've played, and I actually think it's one of my personal favorites. Skyward Sword tries to tell a story, a more cohesive story than the other games that I've played so far in the timeline that I'm establishing for you, and which stands to reason because Skyward Sword is like a 2012 game compared to A Link to the Past, which was, I want to say, in the 90s, but I'm not really sure because it was on SNES. But Skyward Sword is really good. My biggest problem with Skyward Sword is that not even the backtracking. I think the backtracking is okay in some aspects, because I do like the fact that they shake up the backtracking a little bit, especially like when you go back to the Farron Woods and it's all flooded, or when you go to the mountain, which the name is, it's eluding me. The mountain, you get captured and you don't have any of your equipment, so you gotta like kind of maneuver around that, and I think that's pretty cool. Skyward Sword is long. It is really long. It feels longer than any of the other Zelda games that I've played before it and subsequently after, to be honest. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I think the backtracking kind of makes it worse. I think that some of the dialogue is kind of okay. This is the first game where I have a companion, which is Fi. She's okay, or he. I want to say it's she. She's okay. I think she does what she needs to do, but I don't think she's really useful until the very end, where she becomes the Master Sword or locks the Master Sword or whatever she does. I think she's okay, just in that regard. A lot of the thing I like about Skyward Sword is the openness. I really liked flying around through the sky, the Great Sky, I think it's called. No, that's the Great Sea. That's a different game. The sky, where the Sky Sanctuary and the island is at. That's really cool. I think it's really cool to see the beginning of what Link and Zelda would eventually be incarnated as. This is their beginning. This is Ganon's story as well. He's not here, but I know that his ancestor basically curses Link and Zelda to always have to redo this entire thing, and that's kind of interesting. I think the whole lore aspect is probably why I like Skyward Sword. Not story-wise, yes, but gameplay-wise, I think it's just, I love the combat. I think it's really cool that you can like move your sword in different directions, and it's kind of dynamic. Now, it's not like super crazy or anything, but I think the bosses are probably the best bosses I've ever faced in any of the games before and after this, for the most part. But Skyward Sword is a pretty solid game. It's probably the only problem I have with it, and the only reason it's not my personal favorite. I know I said earlier that it probably was, but there's another game on this list that I think is better. The other reason I want to play this game again is to like go through the adventure again. I think it's pretty solid. I like doing the trials where everything kind of slows down and you can collect all those not giant, but like those floating like orb things or whatever. Those are pretty cool. The combat is really what does it for me. I think it's really good. And again, I should preface that I played this on the Switch, so there's that. So yeah, I think it's pretty solid. I think it's too long, definitely too long. I wish it was cut down a little bit, but oh well, it's just kind of what we have to go. Thankfully, I don't have a lot to say about it. I think we can just move right along. The next game I played on the list was the Minish Cap, I believe. I believe the Minish Cap is next. Now, this game is actually my personal favorite out of all of them. Minish Cap is solid. It is fantastic. I think the best part about this game is the fact that it's short and it still has the same formula of the other Zelda games, but I think the reason I like about this game is, one, it's short, and two, I think that it just flows really well. I think the gameplay is fantastic. I think it's a better Link to the Past than Link's Awakening. I think it's just solid. I love the sprite work. I love the way the characters are. I love the being able to shrink and rise. I love the creativity that comes with that, with some of the bosses, and I just think it's a fantastic game. I literally do not have any other thing to say about it, which is interesting because you would think I would have a lot to say about it, but no, I liked every aspect of it, and because of that, I don't have a lot to say about it. Gameplay basically follows A Link to the Past and Link's Awakening in the top-down perspective, and it flows and it plays absolutely incredible, and it is my favorite Zelda game on this list that I will be talking about, or that I have been talking about. That being said, let's move to the next game, Ocarina of Time. Ocarina of Time is okay. My problem with Ocarina of Time is the controls, but that's because it's made on the N64 and, it is an older game. So I won't dock too many points off of it. I think Ocarina of Time is a pretty interesting step in the 3D space. Obviously, it was the first game in 3 dimensions, and I know it's very impressive for its time, but I don't think it's impressive now. So sue me. I think it's just okay. But you know what I do like about Ocarina of Time? The music. The music is fucking fire in that game, and there's nothing I can do to convince anybody. If you're not convinced convinced, you should probably play it, or just listen to the soundtrack. My favorite parts is just listening to the Ocarina and the different songs of it. Prelude to Light is my favorite song, probably. Ocarina of Time is very important. It's the split in the timeline. It's the one that starts the whole craziness that is timelines and like all that garbage. So, and that's kind of what actually, it brought me to the series, this timelines. I think the timelines are super cool. I love the fact that you can do a lot of creativity with that. On one timeline, the hero is defeated. On one timeline, the hero wins. Another timeline, there is no hero because he went back to the past. So because of that, there's a lot of different options that you could take the story. And even though Zelda games have not been super crazy with story, there we have it. You know, we have a lot of possibilities that we can do the games with, which is great. I'm happy to hear it. Ocarina of Time is just okay. I don't think it's amazing. I don't like playing it. I probably will never play it. The 3DS remake is okay. I remember playing that and I remember enjoying it a lot more, but I don't have a 3DS anymore, so I had to emulate and play the Nintendo 64 version, and thus that is what my experience is. Regardless, I don't have a lot to say about it. Oh well. The last game on the list that I have to talk about of the available games that I've played is The Wind Waker. The reason I saved this game for last is, one, that's the game I finished last, but also because it is one of the most visually striking and most impressive game in this entire list. That's not the Minish Cap, because the Minish Cap is incredible and I will not tolerate any harassment on that game. The Wind Waker is amazing. I think that it's a pretty structurally sound game, but I do have problems with it. I don't think the Great Sea is as interesting as the sky in Skyward Sword. I think there's just nothing to do in it except for, get the fish and complete your sea chart, and that's unfortunate. But oh well, that's just kind of how it has to be done. The Wind Waker is a pretty good example of what a story with a Link could have. I love the Link in this game. I think because of the fact that he's not a person born from the curse, if you will. He's not born Link. He's born as somebody who looks like Link and just happens to be named after Link. I think that's kind of cool. I think that he earns his right to be a hero, and I think that's pretty fantastic if you were to ask me. Wind Waker, I like the idea of having to go out and explore and do your thing, but I feel like it's just, as a phenomenal game as it is, I just think the pacing is just kind of okay. I think the game is short, and that's why I like it a lot better than something like Skyward Sword or A Link to the Past, but I think it's just okay. I wish, why do I keep saying it? I think it's just okay. I think it's a phenomenal game, but it's not my favorite in the series, that's all. Okay. So we finished talking about all of the games, and that's great, that's wonderful. You heard my individual thoughts on each game, but now I have to go into a little bit more detail about the overarching thing of Zelda as a whole. I do not like the formula. I do not like the formula of the game where you go through three dungeons in the early game, and then you get the Master Sword, and then you have to do 7 more dungeons. The problem with that is that I don't feel like the stories carry the games, and because of that, I don't like having to just do constant dungeoning. I think that because of that, there's nothing to grab me. There's no character that I can really care about. There's no, Link, he doesn't talk, so he doesn't have anything to say. We don't even know what he's thinking. We just kind of go with the flow. A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, Ocarina of Time, Skyward Sword. Well, I guess really all of the games in this list follow that franchise defining thing. And that's kind of the biggest problem for me. I don't like the dungeoning. I think the puzzles are great. I think the game is visually and the games are, they each have their own distinct style, and I love that. I love the fact that you can pick whatever one you want, and they'll be different from the ones that you've been playing throughout, whatever. And I think that's really cool that lore-wise, at least, the games are so far apart because they're all from different eras. I love that. I think it's pretty fantastic, but the gameplay itself is something that I don't really care too much about. A lot of the time, you're really just slashing, pressing the B and stuff like that, and it's fine. It does what you need it to do. You block occasionally, depending on the enemy. Sometimes you might have to use the hook shot to, open yourself up, or you can maybe use the whip in Skyward Sword, or you can use the feather in Link's Awakening to just jump over them regardless, or the Minish Cap for that matter. And there's a lot of different tools you can use, and they're all, it's great. You find your heart pieces, you get more hearts, and you can become stronger, stuff like that. Those are really good elements of the game. The reason I wanted to bring all of this up is because I think that the Minish Cap is probably my favorite of the game. Not only do you have a really clear-cut goal of finding Vati, or fighting Vati and preventing him, but I think that the gimmick of always having more clones to make, and also there's not that many dungeons in the game overall. I think probably plays a really good thing, and it's a handheld title, so of course it's not going to be as big as something like Skyward Sword or something like that. And I really like the pacing of it. I think it's fantastic. I think that game is done really well. Something that the overall games do really well is music. I think none of the games have bad soundtracks. In fact, I think I can pick apart at least one song in each game that I really like, or one dungeon in each game that I really like, and I like that. The dungeons aren't, as an overall package, I don't think the dungeons are bad in any particular way. I actually think that the dungeons are probably what Zelda's known for, of course. So the dungeons are what people play the games for, and you go through them and you're trying to do the puzzles, and I think the puzzles are fantastic. In some games, in other games it's not. I think my favorite puzzle so far is the ship from Skyward Sword. I think that's a very fantastic dungeon. Using the whip to get across and like having to use the time stones and stuff, that's a very I think Skyward Sword is probably the best when it comes to dungeon design, but I think every game has their own striking dungeons. I think Ocarina of Time, the Spirit Temple is very cool because you have to go back in time to do the first half, and then you have to do the second half as an adult. I think as a whole, I think if Ocarina of Time did more of that, I would love that game significantly more, but unfortunately it really only happens once. Oh well, we gotta move on. And the biggest disappointment I have for the series is that I think that the story is just, I don't care too much, I think it's great that we have a reason to do what we're doing. Usually in every game there's always an option, like Ocarina of Time, we gotta stop Ganon because obviously he turns the future into a complete ass of itself, and that's unfortunate. And then we have the Wind Waker where we just have to stop Ganon because, actually no, in Wind Waker you want to save your sister, and then at the very middle point you're like, oh yeah, we gotta stop Ganon because he's an asshole. And I actually like that game's Ganon. We'll talk about Ganon in a minute. Stopping Vati is a really good thing because you have Ezra, I think his name's Ezra, on your helmet, and he's like, oh, we gotta go and stop him because he's gonna get a sword and it's gonna fuck the whole world up, and you're like, all right, let's do it. So, and there's something about him like always talking to you that I think I really like. Unlike Fi, who's really annoying. But anyways, so the plots are serviceable. There's nothing really complex about any of the plots. Ocarina of Time is probably the only interesting one in the sense that of course it's the one that breaks through the timeline. I mentioned that earlier. It's great, it's wonderful, but I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's gonna break any ground. I heard that in Breath of the Wild the plots and the characters do matter, so I'm really looking forward to playing that and finding out what I can do to really enjoy that, because I think that's kind of a bummer. I don't feel like I have to care about any of the characters. I'm just playing to play, and that's it. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I'm me as a person. I like to know what I'm doing. I like to have a reason for doing what I'm doing, and there are reasons to do what you're doing, but I don't think they're very compelling, and I think they're very kind of not below average, actually. I don't even think, they're really great. So that's the plot covered. I think the plot is just okay. I talked about the gameplay, I talked about the story, talked about the music. Let's talk about the companions. Ocarina of Time has Navi. In Wind Waker you have the King of Red Lions. In Skyward Sword you have Fi. In the Minish Cap you have Ezra, whichever one, I don't remember. Link's Awakening, you don't have a partner, so that's kind of cool. Oh no, I guess the owl is the partner in that game. The owl helps you a lot in that game. Regardless, companions I think are kind of okay. I don't think Navi is as annoying as people think she is. I think she's okay. I don't think she has any problem. I think that the companions are kind of unfortunate though, because without Link being able to talk, the companions should theoretically be able to carry the plot forward and talk for Link. And the only time I think that happens is the King of Red Lions, when he's talking to one of the creatures that knows Hylian. That was really cool, by the way. That's kind of one of the thing where he talks for the protagonist. Fi doesn't talk for the protagonist. She talks just to the protagonist and tells him what to do, what he has to do in order to break the curse, or help, whatever the case might be, to help Zelda and find Zelda and whatever the case might be. So Fi's okay. Navi really is just there so that she gives you gameplay. I don't even remember if she talks after the intro. That's how kind of forgettable she is. I don't think Navi's as good a companion as people might think that she is. At least I don't know. There's something about it that just I feel like is a waste of potential. Ezra's pretty cool. I like the old kind of wizard person, and he kind of, if I remember correctly, he's there, but he talks more because he's always like, all right, Link, now we did this, now let's go and do that so that we can do this. And I feel like it's just always reminding me of the goal. And again, the game's not very long, so I just like that. Also, Ezra's a active character because he's one of the characters that actually is involved in Vati's like whole plot. So the fact that he's in the game is great because he is the background, he's the lore. So Ezra being the way he is really cool. I really like the entire thing. I love the way it works. So he's a very good companion, but he's also one of the best companions because of the fact that I feel like he has a lot of plot significance. But one of the better, slightly better than him is the King of Red Lions, who, by the way, is probably the absolute homie. Like, he helps you in the beginning, and then he turns out to be the king of Hyrule, and then on top of that, he knows about the prophecy, he knows about Tetra, and he's trying to guide Link, even though Link is not somebody who is the hero. He's just a guy, and the King of Red Lions is like, oh well, who cares, let's do it. And I think he's probably the best companion because he's cool. I have no problem with that. I think he's amazing. And so with the companions out of the way, I don't think I have a lot more to talk about. I think I've talked about a lot of things in this ramble of a video. I honestly think that when you go to watch it, it's going to be highly edited down. Right now, it's about 33 minutes into the recording, but it's definitely not going to be a 33-minute video. There's a lot of ums and pauses and stuff like that that are probably going to be taken out. But I just wanted to talk about Zelda as a whole because I know people really like this series, and I like the series too for different reasons than other people like. And because it was unstructured, I just kind of wanted to get all my thoughts out there as soon as I could because I didn't want to do another long scripted video with the Persona series coming out. This one was just off the cuff, and look, I'm already almost 35 minutes into this project. So I think it's really good. I think the editing is going to be what costs me the most amount of time rather than just talking. If I think of anything, I will definitely put it in. I want to apologize for the audio quality. I'm still getting used to the microphone that I'm using, so I'm not really sure how it's going to sound. I don't know if I'm going to have to turn it down. I don't know if I'm going to have to turn it up. I probably won't have to turn it up though. I hope it really comes out to be a really good project, and I hope you guys have enjoyed listening to me rant about it. I hope that you guys come back. I hope that you guys check out my previous videos in the Persona series. Even if you haven't played Persona, I genuinely think that maybe you'll enjoy those more structured videos. I could really use the support. I'm trying to get started on YouTube. I'm not really here for professionalism. I'm just here as a hobby, but it's really good to get to distract the mind and stuff like that. So I want to once again thank you guys for watching. It's very long. This is just one of the more obvious and honest videos that I can make, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed.